In this episode, we speak with Scott Goodson, the founder and CEO of StrawberryFrog, a powerhouse creative consulting company who has worked with iconic brands, including Google, Mercedes, Heinekin, Emirates, Pepsico, LG, Truist, and many others. StrawberryFrog is behind the Purpose Power Index, the world's first empirical study of purpose-driven companies. Scott founded the company over 25 years ago. 3 key takeaways from this episode include: 1. Think hard about your company's purpose, create a movement, and accelerate your company's trajectory. 2. You can take on massive industry incumbents and win, even as a small business. And 3. Cultivate a family culture of entrepreneurship. It can inspire future generations. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you. I'd kind of like to break up this conversation into separate parts. First off, we'd like to talk about you and your company or your firm and your journey building your firm. And then we'll talk more specifically into the work you're most involved in and what you write about, what you talk about. So first off, tell us about StrawberryFrog.
Well, I grew up in a family, first of all, of a lot of entrepreneurs. My grandfather was from London, England, and he grew up working in the publishing industry, and then he moved to Canada in the early 1900s and started a publishing and printing company back in the early days, and they were publishing Reader's Digest. And from that, my grandmother was entrepreneurial, a woman who was married to him. Her name was Etta, and she invested in real estate. And, he made the money, she would invest it. So they were both very entrepreneurial, and my dad was an entrepreneur. He took over my grandfather's business, and he branched out into advertising. And he met my mother, who was a creative director for Canada's largest department store called Morgan's at the time in the 1950s and 60s. And so she worked there. She also worked in other areas. So both my mom and my dad were entrepreneurs. And so there was a lot of that ether kind of seeping through into the skin when we were kids. And today, all my sisters, I have 4 sisters, all of them are entrepreneurs. So I think a lot of it is in the culture of growing up. But for me, I kind of took my dad's work and to the next level. I started working in the advertising industry back in the 1980s. And I know that's a million years ago when the dinosaurs walked the land of opportunity, but I saw the opportunity being to come up with a business that would compete with those dinosaurs. And a lot of the thinking that I put into StrawberryFrog in the early days really grew out of my experience working in the advertising industry in, of all places, Stockholm, Sweden. So I know I kind of moved around a lot on this first answer, but I grew up in Canada. I met my wife, who's Swedish. I moved to Stockholm. I started working in advertising. And what the Swedes did, which you didn't see anywhere else, at least I didn't see anywhere else, was they, and a lot of the Nordic companies, they were really good at being able to form super effective marketing teams so that they could develop, let's say, a brand idea for IKEA, and then, or Ericsson at the time was the world's leader in mobile phones. And they would launch that idea in, let's say, Sweden, and then they would launch in Norway, and they would launch in Germany, and then the rest of Europe, and then Eastern Europe, then Greece, then Turkey, Thailand, Vietnam, etc., Australia, Brazil, and so forth. And they really didn't see borders as a limitation versus the American and the British model, and to some extent French model, which is big corporate advertising agencies, or what Ad Age called dinosaurs, big, huge bureaucratic organizations. So what I learned as working in Sweden is you don't have to be a huge corporation to build a global brand. You can actually benefit if you're a client from a smaller, more creative and nimble organization with senior people knowing what they're doing. And so that was what I wanted to build with Strawberry Frog. That was one kind of pillar of what we were doing. It was like smaller, better, faster, cheaper, compared to the big corporate agencies. So that's one. Yeah, sorry.
No. That's fantastic.
That was a big answer. So I'm sorry.
No, great background there, which will lead us into how you do things differently than others today. And I've seen some of your kind of brand communications, messaging, and it is truly impactful. So are there some maybe early examples of things you did that you're kind of like really proud to point to?
In Strawberry Frog, you mean?
Yeah, like advising certain brands.
Well, I'll give you one example. We, when we started Strawberry Frog back in the late 90s, our first client was Swatch. And I had a relationship with them from Sweden because we used to work for Swatch out of Stockholm in my old agency because I was an owner of an agency in Sweden, which we ended up selling, and relocated to Amsterdam, which is where we started Strawberry Frog. And our first client was the launch of the smart car. You've seen them, little small 2-seater vehicles. The idea was the brainchild of Mr. Hayek Sr., the founder of Swatch. And then he partnered with Volkswagen to build it into a vehicle. Volkswagen ended up leaving that partnership and Mercedes jumped in and took it over. So then Mercedes did the manufacturing and Swatch did the marketing, sales and marketing. And so we worked with them right from the very beginning. And it was such a unusual and revolutionary way of launching a car. I don't know if from the early days, they invented these tall buildings that were glass that looked like vending machines, and the smart cars looked like they were products in a vending machine. If you see, I think it's CarMax now, they do something similar, one of those internet car brands. But back in the early days, when we were starting in the 90s, Swatch was really doing really, really crazy different things. So we had this idea that we wanted to create a movement for them and not just another advertising campaign to sell a B segment 2-seater. So we said we want to create a movement to reinvent the urban environment and try to solve some of the big issues that smart, could solve, like parking. Like how do you deal with parking lots for rental car companies that are full of these huge sedans on the weekends? Could you come up with a whole mobility concept where you buy a smart car? It's like being a membership. You get access to all the Mercedes, for example, that are in, the Hertz rental car companies, parking lots at the airport on the weekend. If you need to go with your family somewhere, you can park, vertically as opposed to, horizontally. And you get a discount. I mean, so all these positive things that, you were ushering in when you bought a smart car, and it was a huge success. And I think, it proved to us right from the first day that this idea of, coming up with designing a movement for a brand was a lot more effective and engaging than just advertising.
Mm-hmm. And so how difficult was it to grow your business? I mean, were you kind of approaching one new client at a time and kind of pointing to the most recent past success? And did you think about then like, oh, we're doing well here in Europe, we're going to go to the US and build, have an office there? Tell us about how you expanded the business in those days.
So I think it's really important from before you start a company that you have a purpose and that you have an ethos and a really simple and motivating story behind why you exist. And, in the advertising industry and a lot of business to business, professional services industries, people don't spend enough time thinking about a story. They have companies that are called Hinkle, Dinkle, and Spinkle, and they do accounting, or they're a legal firm, or they're an advertising firm, and they try to sell themselves on their reputation or their clients. If you're starting from scratch, it really does help to have a simple and fun story. So before we had a client in the door, before Swatch and all our clients came in, I wrote a book. It was called Strawberry Frog and Strawberry Frog and the Dinosaur. And it was about how this little amphibian, which has a red body and blue legs, so it looks like it's a rebel with genes, is fighting these huge, clunky, quirky dinosaurs. And we came up with the bureaucratosaurus, all these we named all the negative things that you associated with these big corporate agencies. And we called them dinosaurs. And the book is hilarious. And the media ate it up. We were famous from day one. People used pages of the book to demonstrate in a cheeky way what was wrong with the industry, overbilling and slowness and bureaucracy and all that stuff. And then we had this smaller, more agile and much more beautiful creature, StrawberryFrog. And it was faster. And, it had been doing what entrepreneurs have been doing since people started hawking wares in the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago. It was trying to bring to market a better solution at a cheaper price. So that's what we did. And the story was immediately became global. There was a big article about us in Time magazine. And then from there, it just went, it went to the universe. We put on a lot of business very quickly. And we ended up in a very short period of time opening offices in Dubai, Mumbai, Singapore, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and a few other places. And we started wooing and winning some major corporations. We won the global Heinekin business in a competitive pitch against McCann Erickson and Wieden Kennedy, which in the advertising world, those are the biggest agency and one of the most creative. We won Credit Suisse Bank globally against Publicis, which is a very large French company. We won, in fact, the global Capgemini business. Capgemini is a very big, very prestigious French-based, Paris-based technology consulting company. We won them against all the big French firms. So we started to put on some serious clients, and we started opening offices. When we were in Dubai, we won the global Emirates business. Emirates is the largest airline in the planet. And then we started winning other regional business there. In Brazil, we won a big chunk of Pepsico for South America, Quaker, which is part of Pepsico. We won Natura, which is one of the largest companies in Brazil. It's a bath and beauty brand in Brazil, a natural beauty brand in Brazil. And in India, we won Mahindra, which is a very, very large conglomerate that manufactures automobiles. It's the largest tractor manufacturer in the world. They have something now which is called the Pininfarina Battista. All you car fans out there may be familiar with Pininfarina. They were the design studio behind all the Ferrari cars, and Mahindra bought them and then named their $2 million electric supercar, which is a mind-blowing machine after that. So we really, ASICS in Japan, LG in Korea, we started picking up some major clients, and we were able to demonstrate over time and time again that you could, in fact, do things better, faster, smarter. We were technologically advanced as a company. We were coming from Sweden. We had use of internet and email and technology to let us share files over the internet, which back in the late 90s, not everybody did, believe it or not, especially not the big corporate ad agencies. I remember going to New York and being in a meeting, and the senior leaders didn't even use email. So we were ahead of the curve in a lot of the technology areas, and we were able to just pull together resources. The other thing we did was one of our first clients was Hachette, which is the big French publishing company. And they asked us to design and develop the first L.com for all L magazines for the French core market, and then for other core markets like the US. And we worked directly with Gilles Ben-Simon, the global creative director in Paris. And what I did at the time was and before, gig workers was a word, is we said, one of the dirty secrets of the ad industry in those days was they had a lot of freelance people, but they didn't like to talk about it because they felt it would make them look smaller to their clients. And we took that as a positive and said, we only work with gig workers because we have an army of people we can pull in, experts all over the planet. And we had external design studios in Australia and San Francisco and Amsterdam and London, in Stockholm, Sweden. And so we were able to do all the work for Hachette, for L.com, with myself, a business leader in my team, one designer, and then everybody else was outsourced to those studios in those other 5 markets. And we were able to do it super fast, very cost effectively. So that was a whole new way of working as well, like bringing gig workers in as a sign of strength and not hide them, as a sign of weakness. So that was really it, like turn the negatives into a positive, compete directly with the big corporates, and beat them at their own game by being smarter, better, faster.
And it seems in your field, it would be very important to continue to innovate the way you create branding campaigns or, the messaging for each customer. How do you institutionalize that? I mean, is this largely driven from your creativity with each client, or are you able to hire the right people to come into your company and you can delegate to them and say, okay, you're going to be working on Heinekin. Let's work together. Bring me your ideas. And then again and again with other companies. How do you ensure that you are in turn protecting your own brand image and reputation within the industry?
Well, you have to have your own IP, and you have to have your own way. What is the Frog way? Now, at Strawberry Frog, we don't do advertising, and we don't do design thinking when it comes to transformation. We create movements at Strawberry Frog. Movement thinking is our approach to a human-centered approach to change. And we use movement thinking, which is applying the principles of social movements to solve business problems. And if you think about it, it's basically the difference between top-down leadership, do this because I tell you to do this, and cross-company leadership, let's do this because we all want to do it because it's relevant to all of us. And it's blowing up the whole model of the editor-in-chief knows best, the top of the company knows best, or this fallacy that we're going to have a small group of people developing a strategy and then we're going to give it to those middle management folks to execute. Nobody wants to just execute. Everybody wants to have a participatory role in developing strategy. And that's what movements are all about. It's about participation, building strong communities around an idea to drive some form of positive change. Now, at the beginning of Strawberry Frog, we said, yes, we're going to do everything I just described to you a minute ago, but we also want to be a company that has a purpose. And the purpose was using creativity for good. And we do that in everything we do. So we motivate people to come work for us because of that soul of the company. And we actually do put that into effect when we work with clients to try to figure out, how can we drive some form of positive change with this client? Whether they explicitly ask for it or whether we want to inspire them to think that way, we think it's beneficial. Then we have the Frog way, which is our approach, which is movements. So it's basically movement inside is purpose-driven transformation inside an organization, and movement outside is external marketing, and using movements as a way to engage people, to build communities of like-minded, passionate advocates.
Mm-hmm. I'd imagine it's somewhat easier for certain brands to kind of demonstrate and talk about their purpose. I mean, you've got brands like Tom's shoes, 1 for 1, or you have, Bomba's socks, maybe more environmentally friendly brands, organic brands. But are you also working with mainstream traditional? I mean, you did mention a good number of these, larger companies. But I guess how do you work with companies where it may seem from the outside they don't have that big distinct purpose that everyone knows about and can identify with the company?
Well, there's big M movement, which is basically driving some form of major positive change in the world. And there's little M movements, which is using culture to engage the people. Both of them are a form of movement. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to, change the world in a major way. We try to do big M movements, and we've done movements. I usually say not every brand can design. We can design a movement for every brand, but not every brand deserves a movement. We were chosen as the lead digital agency for Pampers, and we created a movement for baby development. We took a poop catcher and helped turn it into a movement to drive the growth of a baby and the development of a baby. And our first marketing campaign out of the box, we had 2 marketing campaigns. One was they invented a new diaper that was 2 times thinner and 2 times drier. It was called Drymax. It was the most sophisticated invention that P&G had ever done. And we said, in following the red thread of baby development, we said, this is the perfect performance enhancing athletic gear. Like if you were a swimmer, you have a thin sheath over you as you swim. It makes you run faster. In the case of a smaller, thinner diaper, it helps the baby move. And when babies move, their brains are stimulated. So you have a whole way of thinking now. And parents, of course, want Pampers to help drive baby development because it helps their child become, more in touch with their senses and more in touch with the world around them. So you stop acting like a poop catcher manufacturer, and you start working as a baby development firm. And you build a community of passionate mothers who love this and who are more likely to stick with the brand over, that Pampers sells their diapers to new parents, I should say. And they stick with the brand historically for like a year. And then they become more confident. They realize there are other diapers out there that may cost less. What we were able to do with baby development was extend that period so they would actually keep the diaper longer. And that is more sales. We worked with Jim Beam that when we started with them, they were $7.50 for the same bottle of Jack Daniels. Jim Beam was in the bottom shelf of 7-Eleven with 2 free shot glasses, and Jack Daniels, exactly the same bottle with more or less the same liquid, is sold for $12. Right? That's a testament to the state of the Jim Beam consumer base at the time. They were older, aging males in their late 60s, and Jack had customers in their 50s. And we said, okay, let's bring it down to 40 and let's make it male and female. And let's aim for a particular type of mindset. And we decided we were going to create a movement against the patriarchy and for equality. We hired Mila Kunis as the spokesperson, and the motto was, what was it now? It was make history. Make history. Jim Beam, make history. You may recall that campaign that ran in the United States and globally. And it was a movement, and it delivered a whole new generation of consumers. It actually flipped the market. Jim Beam today has the largest customer base. Their price point is up at par with Jack. They have significantly larger number of female drinkers, consumers. So a movement actually leads to business results. It's not just Tom's shoes or some of the other brands you mentioned. This is a big, huge corporate brand investment. This is what the biggest brand at Procter & Gamble did. Okay. This is as I said, you can design a movement for any company, but not every brand deserves it.
Mm-hmm. Like, if you think about like industrial companies, I mean, you're talking about, some brands who don't deserve it, who don't deserve a movement. I mean, if you're polluting, can you figure out, I'm sure there's a way to figure out a movement to create, positive light for that company. If it's an energy company, could be providing, households with electricity that power their homes, power their lives. So, I guess, how do you determine, do you ever turn down clients?
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. We've turned down clients. We've resigned clients. You have to have principles don't mean anything unless they cost you something. This is what we believe in. This is our bread and butter. You asked the question earlier, what do people come to StrawberryFrog for? They come because we have a point of difference. We have a unique way of doing it. We have to train our people on how to do movements. We have to train our people. How do you start a relationship with a client? What do you say? How do you get them to think in terms of movements? What are the workshops like? What are the phases of a movement? If you think about what are the communication or engagement phases, they're very different for a movement than they would be in a traditional advertising campaign, because a movement is think of it in a different way. Advertising, actually, I'll add another dimension to this conversation in a moment, but historically, advertising has been, you pay media dollars, you get awareness, you stop paying, awareness goes down. A movement is basically think of it as a tornado. It's like a perpetual movement moving forward. It doesn't need only paid advertising. It can use PR, social media. It can be LinkedIn, speeches from the president internally. It can be actions. It can be events. It can be education. All of those things lead to movements. You need to have information, education, inspiration, motivation, galvanizing, mobilizing. Those are all aspects of what a movement is. And once you start to think about it in that context, you see the power that it has. And what I was going to say a moment ago is in today's world where iOS, Apple has canceled cookies. And, in 2023, when Google will also jump on that same bandwagon and cookies, we'll be living in a post-cookie world where buying the who will disappear. It'll move from buying the who to buying the why. And the why is all about movements. Mm-hmm. And, when we partner with artificial intelligent media companies who can help identify the why out there, we have an amazing track record in terms of results in a world where you can no longer target iOS users, right? Because of the cookie being no longer valid on a lot of iOS platforms. So in this new world that's going to take shape, I think movements are even more relevant than they were when we started 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting the way you talk about movements, because it's not just something that's like for the environment or for the social good. I mean, it's also about, I don't know, maybe feeling young again, like buying Jim Beam, and seeing Mila Kunis, and you're like, oh yeah, she's part of my crowd, my generation. Yeah. What are some of the most compelling movements? I mean, you mentioned some of them, and they were compelling, but are there other memorable ones that come to mind?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the best ones was a few years ago. We were approached by a company called Orexo, which is was a large pharmaceutical from Sweden, and they came to us with at first we were like, I don't think this is right for us, and they said, we manufacture something called MAT, medically assisted treatment, which is a drug that people who are addicted to heroin take in order to get off of heroin. And we were like, well, we don't really know if that's right for us. But we said, let us think about it a bit. And we started to dig into what they represented. And what we found was, first of all, there was the largest epidemic hitting this country. Think of it as a jumbo jet of people dying every month from overdose of heroin. We found out that this heroin epidemic was doctor prescribed, pharmaceutical approved epidemic. In other words,
like opioids.
Correct. Accidental opioid addiction. I had no idea. When they walked in our door, I had no idea this was happening. I read about epidemic, but I thought it was like, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, people deciding to become heroin addicts. No, this is Bobby, 16-year-old Bobby playing baseball, who gets hit in the head by a fastball, goes to the doctor, and the doctor says to the parents, hey, take some Percocets or some Oxycontin home, because you never know, Bobby may wake up with a pain in the morning. 25% of people taking their first opioid medication are addicted. Mm-hmm. And of those 25%, 5% end up on heroin. That was the statistic that they presented to us. It was mind-blowing. So, and we looked out there and we saw that nobody was talking about it. The government wasn't talking about it. Newspapers weren't talking about it. Nobody was talking about it. In fact, the only thing that you could read about were these pill farms in Florida. But even those things, people didn't really understand what they were about. So we just said, we are going to break this wide open. So this company, what they do is they make a drug that helps people addicted to heroin get off of it. And in the United States, the biggest company in the market is a company called Suboxone. They're the largest medically assisted treatment. Now, that medication is a form of opioid too, but it's less dangerous than, I'm not going to, don't quote me on this from a medical perspective, but this is what I understand to be accurate. But the way they're at the time, the way that they went to market, they provided a large dose of this MAT. And what this new company was coming into the market with was a smaller dose. So in other words, it was a more innovative delivery system. Now, how do you get into a market and launch a product against an elephant who owned the market, right? Which is Suboxone, the biggest medically assisted treatment, and launch a product which is better for you because it's giving you less medication, right? But effective. Because to people addicted to heroin, they believe psychologically that the more equals better. Less is not effective, but it's not accurate. So in order to break the market open, we created a movement called Out the Monster of accidental opioid addiction. We launched that movement in 2015. And within 12 months, articles started appearing all over the country about this monster, this epidemic, and things started breaking open. And I think we really saw for the first time what we see today is the government and the courts and journalists digging into this thing and realizing what it is. And the result of that we're seeing play out. But we were the first, and it was a very positive way of helping that company into the market. We won a gold lion, which in the advertising world is a very positive thing. So that's a good example. A bit complicated, but nevertheless, I think a good example of positive work we did.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic example. I'm sure you have many like those. We're actually over time here. This was a really fun conversation. I do like to end with two questions, and this veers more towards the personal. It'd be interesting to get your answer given your kind of history of entrepreneurship in your family. But is there a particular leader or person that you admire that has maybe had a big influence on you?
Yeah, I would say there's two leaders. One was my dad. He was an amazing entrepreneur. He really had an engine inside of him. And even if he wanted to turn it off, he couldn't. And it was, he always had ideas. And I was always inspired by everything that he told me and did. And he really did an amazing job to inspire me when I was a child and as I grew up as a teenager and then off to university. And I think one of the things that he taught me was gumption and perseverance, and that those two things in the end will help success. And I did today. I think they're still accurate. The other man who inspired me was a man named Uli Wiesendanger, who he was actually my mentor for many years. He was in the advertising world. There was a big global advertising agency, which for many years in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s was really, really good. And it was called TBWA. And they, in the US, I think they're called TBWA Chiat. Anyway, the W of the TBWA was my mentor, and he was our first chairman at StrawberryFrog, and he was a great inspiration. I called him when he was still the chairman of TBWA and asked him if he would be our chairman, and he said, "Oh no, I can't." Then a couple of months later, I heard that he retired, so I reached out to him again, and then I brought him up to Amsterdam, and I dropped him off at his hotel. And I said, "I'll see you in the morning." And the next morning I came to the hotel, pick him up. And I said, "Did you sleep well?" And he said, "Well, I got to the desk and they didn't have a hotel room for me. So they ordered a taxi and they drove me about an hour south of Amsterdam. I had never slept in a waterbed. There was plastic palm trees and there was a mirror on the ceiling. And the woman behind the desk had a tiger outfit on. My wife would love a waterbed." And I thought, oh my God, he's never going to come back to Amsterdam. And he actually was serious. He wanted to come back, bring his wife and let her try it. And he and I became good friends after that. Of course, I apologize for our office not ensuring we had a room that night. But he is a remarkable human being, an incredible creative leader, an incredible, someone who you can lean on in tough times. And when you're an entrepreneur, you always want to have someone there to say, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay." And he was that very much for me.
Mm-hmm. Last question. Is there a book that has had a profound impact on you? If that's too serious, you can just give a book recommendation.
No, there were two books I read when I started the company. I read a lot of books. Two that I loved. One was a book by a Swedish author called Kjell Nordstrand. He is a professor at the business school in Stockholm. He wrote a book called Funky Business, and it was how creativity in leadership is going to be particularly critical in the future. And he wasn't describing it in terms of advertising. He was a business solutions using creativity. And I think that's still valid today because, yes, data analytics are valid, but if everyone has equal access to data, or at least almost equal access to kind of data that everybody has, what in the end helps you tell a better story or outcompete your competitors? I think you really do need to have, use your creativity to solve problems and not just data or technology. The other thing that I read, another book I read was by Guy Kawasaki called Rules for Revolutionaries. And I actually became friends with Guy. I read the book. I wrote him immediately. I said, "Oh my God, I love this book." And so I love that book too. I wrote a very good friend of mine also named Adam Morgan wrote a book called Eat the Big Fish, which I love that book. And Adam was the strategist who worked on Apple when they did the famous Apple advertising, when they threw the hammer at the
1984.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he took that challenger thinking, which was inherent in Steve Jobs' persona, which of course, became the aura around Apple as well, challenger to the status quo type thing. He took that and turned it into a science, and he created a company called Eat the Big Fish. And I loved it. And Adam and I are still very close friends today. So those three people influenced me a lot.
And what you have a book too, right? You have a book or two. Would you like to give a little bit of a plug?
Yes. My first book was written in 2010, 2011 called Uprising. And it's this idea of movements and movement marketing, how you should think about creating a movement or designing a movement for your brand as a way to grow your company. So it's more of a marketing book. And then the latest book I wrote together with our head of strategy, Chip Walker, is called Activate Brand Purpose, and using movement thinking to increase the willingness for people to work for you, your company, or increase the willingness for people to buy from you. And we actually look at all the different, if you think about a C-suite, all the different leaders in that C-suite. We look at HR, we look at innovation, we look at finance, we look at CEO, and we show how movement thinking can help you do a better job in each of those areas, as well as the CMO and for marketing as well.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, I want to thank you again for joining us today and sharing your insights. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure. Hopefully, I didn't run on too long in some of my answers, and hopefully they were clear. Yeah. And if anybody ever wants to find out more, they can go to strawberryfrog.com. There's a lot of background on what we've been doing.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great.